Thank you all for coming. Go ahead and call the roll.
Trustee Guyer.
Here.
Trustee Spurling. Here. Trustee Bauman.
Here.
Trustee Youngerman.
Here.
Trustee Marisak. Trustee Brazaska.
Here. We do have a quorum this evening. Moving into our public participation, we have the introduction of employees.
Hello, everyone. So tonight we are introducing two members of our finance team. So we have Ginger McKenna. So right here in the audience, Ginger joined our team in August of 2024. She is our finance assistant, accounts payable and payroll. Ginger lives in Yorkville and comes with over 30 years of accounting experience to our team, so that's amazing. Ginger served as the accounting manager for Aurora Metal right here in Montgomery for over 31 years. And then she also served as the finance manager for the Sandwich Park District for over a year. Ginger brings really positive vibes, and she's a great addition to the finance team, so we really appreciate her always cup half full attitude. So we also have Karen tonight. So Karen Johns joined our team the same time Ginger did in August of last year. It was in our newly created position, the accountant. Karen has a great deal of local government experience in both municipal and park district. Karen previously served as a finance director for the village of Riverside, as well as finance director for the DeKalb Park District. Karen lives in Aurora and enjoys her shortest commute of her entire career. So that's a great plus. And in the summer, you can find Karen and her husband relaxing out in parks and enjoying car shows as they display their two lovely, beautiful vintage vehicles as well. So Karen is a great fit for our finance department as well. So we're really appreciative of having both of them join our team. And I'm happy to have them introduce themselves to you, ladies, if you want to get up and introduce yourselves. But if you can help me welcome them to the team, please.
Welcome, and thank you for coming tonight. Appreciate it. All right, the last item for public participation is a public comment period. Any member of the public here wishing to address the board? If you can just state your name and address.
Good evening. I'm Carl Otteson of Otteson, Denolfo, Hasenbaugh, and Castaldo. I guess it's a mouthful that we never should have done. Would have been much easier to just have two names in the firm instead of adding in all four. I did send to the administrator on Friday an email with a letter from myself as president and managing shareholder of the firm. So I'm here to answer any questions that you might have, and I assume it's when you get down to item number 6C.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll move on. I'll read the items on the consent agenda and entertain a motion for approval. Minutes of the January 13th Village Board meeting, accounts payable summary report for January 27th, the refuse report, and ordinance 2113 granting a special use and related variation. This is second reading.
Second.
Any discussion? Go ahead.
Trustee Bauman.
Yes.
Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
Trustee Brazaska.
Yes.
Trustee Guyer.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
That carries 5-0, thanks. Under items for separate action tonight, the first one is ordinance 2112, granting an amendment to a special use for outdoor storage and related variations. This is for the northeast corner of Alcott and Orchard Road. This is second reading. We talked about it at the last meeting. The only reason we didn't put it on consent is that you weren't at the meeting. Does staff have anything additional to add? Since
No,
last
just that, based on the direction from the board at the last meeting, the ordinance has been revised for option one, which was no expiration date, but tying it specifically to the site plan and landscape plans that have been approved. So that is what is before you, with the finding of fact revised to reflect those changes.
Thank you. Comments, questions?
Motion to approve.
Go ahead.
Trustee Guyer?
Yes.
Trustee Spurling?
Yes.
Trustee Bauman?
Yes.
Trustee Youngerman? Trustee Brazaska?
Yes.
That carries 5-0. Thank you. All right, item B is gateway signage purchase. Christina?
Thank you, President Bradley and Village Board. Before you this evening is the request for the approval of the purchase of our first large monument sign for the Village of Montgomery. This sign is to be located at the southwest corner of Orchard and Jericho Road intersection. You may recall that the location of this first large-scale sign was determined as part of the UDO for Gas and Wash, the Ricky Rocket subdivision, for the use of a gateway sign. Last year, we came before you and presented a 5-year plan for enhancing our branding and wayfinding signage throughout the community. During this process, we coordinated the concept plans and pricing from 3 companies and ultimately chose Aurora Sign Company. Since phase 1 is now complete, you will find year 2 detailed before you this evening. Our first phase of gateway signage was completed last year and has been well received by the public and staff for installation. We're asking tonight for your favorable approval to begin phase 2. This next phase of signage will continue to match our first phase. It includes the fabrication of a 21-foot by 7.4-foot aluminum acrylic sign with painted finish, high-performance vinyl graphics set fabricated on fabricated end caps. Also, the next phase of signage, just to point out, will continue to match our first phase, as well as the brick elements from both the Village Hall and PD buildings. The contrasting brick will provide a well-branded and contiguous look for our village signage. And in your packet this evening, you will find a sign rendering, plat of survey showing the location and the invoices for both fabrication and installation.
Thank you. Questions?
Christina, I just want to make sure I read correctly. There'll be money coming out of the budget from this year and next year to complete everything, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Is there a light on the sign?
There is not at this point in time based on cost. We are potentially going to look in through Public Works. Mark was going to look into some solar lighting to see how that might work out there. But the cost to pull, electrical out there seems pretty cost prohibitive at this point, given the expense of the sign.
But the way the sign is designed, it's not backlit, it's not lit from within. We could potentially put lighting on the front of it at some point in the
Yes.
future if we wanted to.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah, because there are other signs, there are newer signs, the round ones, they're not reflective, so you don't see them at night, unless if they're someplace where there's light.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just curious with upcoming budget season, I know because most of it is in this current budget, we should be fine. We shouldn't have to worry that if we do this, then we have to cut something else.
This is coming out of the MDF budget. It's not in the general
perfect.
fund.
Okay, I'm good then. Thank you.
Can we, if the cost of adding electrical is cost prohibitive through the contractor or can we get a cost estimate from you, Mark, on lighting options? It may make sense to do that lighting option while this is being installed, then as opposed to later, it may be even more. So I just want to know all of our options.
So a few things is, Public Works, we're not staffed for, we would have to install a meter. There's no account set up, so there'd have to be a meter installation. That's beyond any of our staff levels capability, so it'd have to be an electrical contractor that'd have to do that. Again, it can be added down the road. One of the most cost prohibitive portions of this too is the annual or monthly charge for lighting too is something that goes along with this. So not only a upfront cost to install the lighting, but then continual maintenance. One of the things we spoke about on this topic, though, was the advancement in solar lighting, how it's come a long ways and is much more sustainable and has a lot more longevity. So again, that's something that we planned on looking at. That's more cost prohibitive, hopefully.
Do they have solar LED type of light?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Cool.
Is this immediately south of the Gas and Wash Drive?
This would be on the south west corner
The intersection.
at the
coming-
intersection.
Right
of-
at the corner.
Yep. So it would be the northeast corner of the car wash property. However you'd like to put that.
It's right at that little triangle.
Yep, Jericho and Orchard.
We installed one of the smaller gateway signs there temporarily. That one will be taken down and used as our backup in case any of the other ones are damaged. It was part of our plan now we will have a backup in case something happens to one of the other ones.
Okay. Any other questions? Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
Trustee Brzezka.
Yes.
Trustee Guyer.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Bauman.
That carries 5-0. Thank you. All right, item C tonight is TIF number 2 rebate. Jen?
Thank you, President Brawley. So tonight, we have the TIF2 rebate discussion. So in fiscal year '25, the village collected just under $2 million in property tax increment for TIF2. Per our agreement with the other taxing districts, staff has reviewed building permits and detailed EAV within the district. Upon our review, we have not identified any new parcels to take increment from based on improvements to be retained by the village. So at the January 17th joint review board meeting with the other taxing districts, we announced our recommendation of rebate of $497,017. This is an increase of approximately $96,000 over the prior year's rebate. The village will retain a little over $1.5 million in TIF2 to reinvest within the district for improvements. The board has 14 days to object in writing to the information presented here, or you can direct staff to proceed with issuing that refund. And then by waiving that objection period, staff will then issue the refund to Kane County so that they can redisperse those funds to the taxing districts. I'm happy to answer any questions, should you have any.
Thank you. Questions?
There were no objections from the joint review board?
There were not.
I mean, it was on a Friday afternoon, so well played. There was.
It was a good attendance for TIF2 taxing districts.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to waive the 14-day period. Go ahead and pay it to King County.
Second?
Go ahead.
Trustee Guyer.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Bauman. Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
Trustee Brzezka.
Yes.
That carries 5-0. Thanks. All right, item D tonight is ordinance 2114, amending section 11-26.1 of the Village of Montgomery Code of Ordinances. This is for certain trucks prohibited on specific streets within the village. This is a waiver first, passage on second. Director Wolf?
Thank you, President Browley. So the village currently has streets that are posted for weight limits for truck traffic. Primarily, those consist of areas on the east side of town, so through some discussions that have been had at the board level as well as internally with staff, we wanted to take a look at the rest of the village. And so identified in the packet are the additional roadways that we would suggest to post for a weight limit. Obviously, this does not restrict for local deliveries and services such as garbage and snow plowing. It would just limit the ability for trucks over 6 tons to travel those roadways for, unintended reasons other than cut through traffic. So if there's any questions from the board, I'm happy to answer them at this time.
Do we have to post a sign as well
Yes,
in order to enforce it? Got it.
correct.
So we have to purchase the signs for these 11?
Yes, yep, there's money in the budget to support it.
Perfect.
But, and I'm fine with this, but is there money in the budget coming up to have a truck enforcement officer? Because we can have the signage out, but doesn't prevent, the signage doesn't write a ticket. So do we have the money in the budget for a truck enforcement officer?
I don't want to speak on behalf of the police department.
I know that there has been an officer sent to get the certification and training for truck enforcement.
Okay.
So we don't have a specific officer, we have an officer that's trained.
Deputy Chief, can you speak to that? How many officers have gone through the training, please?
Good evening, everybody. Phil told me I was going to not field any questions, so thank you. We do currently have one officer who is fully certified as a truck enforcement officer. We have another that has training. So we do have that capability. We do have some of the equipment that's needed, such as the scales and so on. It's a matter of dedicating time. That, as Trustee Youngerman said, we have that resource. We do try to allocate time as needed, but it is difficult when you have other duties as well, so.
Sure. Thank you.
All right.
Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, so we have the signs, or we gonna have to purchase the signs and
We
post?
we will be purchasing the signs.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll move
So
to
moved.
approve.
Second.
Trustee Spurling,
Yes.
Bauman. Trustee Youngerman.
Yes.
Trustee Brazaska.
Yes.
Trustee Guyer.
Yes.
That carries 5-0. Thank you. Okay. You ready for this? So first up, we have 2 items for discussion tonight. They're amazing presentations. But we have our pavement management study first, and then we'll roll right into the water revenue study presentation. And I'm excited about it.
Excited as Chris looks.
Pavement and water in the same meeting. This is awesome.
We've upgraded. Lots.
Should be good, Sonia, right?
Thank you. Here today present pavement management update. So we did retest the streets this summer, and just here to present the results, go over some budget analysis and discuss some next steps. So just a quick run through, go through the goals of the pavement management system, just a little inventory and database for the village's system, a recap of the infrastructure road program over the last 5 years, the inspection results, some comparison to where we were in 15, 20, and current, some budget analysis we did, next steps, and then I'm happy to take any questions. So the goals of the pavement management program were to assign a rating to each street, inventory each street in the village, develop costs and strategies for maintenance of all the streets, review the budget needs and impacts, and then ultimately apply the budget and develop the 5-year plan. So what is pavement management? It's a decision-making process to help municipalities make cost-effective decisions concerning their pavements, making sure that you're fixing the roads at the right time and the most cost-effective time, and stretch your budget as most cost-effective as possible. So this is kind of the backbone of the pavement management, is you've got PCI here on the left, Pavement Condition Index, rated 0 to 100. And then as time goes along, the pavement will deteriorate. The important thing to note here is that it does not deteriorate linearly. but will be in pretty good condition. Then it kind of deteriorates quickly and then levels back off. So you want to get your streets rehabbed in this section here before you get into the more expensive reconstruction. And the village has done a good job of preventative maintenance to keep those streets in very good and excellent condition longer as well. So what does it help us decide? You can kind of do it two ways. You can determine how much money you want to spend, and the pavement management program will tell you what streets to do, where, and when. Or you could do it the reverse, where you can say, I want to maintain this rank, and it'll tell you how much money you need to spend to maintain this overall pavement condition index for the village. So we ran a couple scenarios in those ways, which we'll discuss later. How do they get tested? So this is an example of a laser crack profile van that the company that we used, IMS. They go through and measure all the cracks, take pictures of the road. Here's kind of an example of the picture they'll take. They'll measure the types of distresses that are there. And 90% of the score is based on the surface condition, which is measures your cracking, what type of cracking you have. Different cracking will determine if you've got underlying subgrade issues or if it's more just related to freeze-thaw thermal distresses, rutting, any depressions you have, potholes, and then 10% of the score will be made up of your roughness index, which is going to measure how smooth of a ride it is as the van is driving down the street. So they get broken up into 6 categories. Excellent being 90 to 100, very good 80 to 89, good 65 to 79, fair 50 to 64, poor 26 to 49, and very poor 0 to 25. So here's some just picture examples of roadways. So here's an example of an excellent roadway. It's going to be a roadway that was recently resurfaced, as this was resurfaced in 2024. 2023. So it's in good condition, brand new, no distresses. A very good roadway. You might start to see very small cracking in the center line or in the lane line. On a good road, you're going to start to see a little more extensive cracking. And then fair, you're going to see more cracking, wider cracks, more distresses in the wheel path. And then a poor road, you might start to see some rutting here on the side, more alligator cracking type stuff, and then a very poor roadway here is an example. And this road is actually slated to be fixed as part of the 2025 road program. So just some picture examples of conditions from excellent to very poor. So just to recap, over the last 5 years, and this is based on moving forward with the program that was approved in the last 5 years in 2025, the village will have done an annual expenditure of $3.256 million, and this does include the 2 STP projects that the village did, which would be the Concord Drive project and the Baseline Road project. So the village did resurface a little over 29 miles, or 5.83 miles per year. That resulted in 37% of the village's streets being resurfaced. And throughout that process, the village did spend an average of $147,000 a year on preventative maintenance. So preventative maintenance right now that the village has been doing is we crack seal streets about every 5 to 6 years after they've been resurfaced, and then we do the asphalt rejuvenation the year after all the streets have been resurfaced. And you'll see in the next slide what that is doing is, or in a future slide, is what that's doing is keeping those excellent streets in excellent condition for a very long time. So it's definitely money well spent on the front end. Here's just a graph that shows 20 years of paving history in the village, and you can really see, we averaged about 1.5 miles-ish from 2004 to 2014, and then from 2015 on, when we had our first IRP, you can see how much more work we've been able to get done. And really see the power of how that fund has been helping the village maintain their streets. This was the 5-year plan that was approved back in 2020. So down here in the green is what is going to be done as part of the plan for this year. And we are currently we will be going out to bid on Thursday for that project, and we'll be looking to bring that forward to the board in the first meeting in March for approval. So just some inspection results. There's 78 miles of roadway in the village that were tested. 0.7 miles of the roadway are still not accepted or binder only, and those are roadways that are in Marquee Point subdivision. The current overall pavement condition index for the village is an 86. So kind of just some perspective. In 2008, the PCI was an 80.8. 2015, and that was mostly due to a lot of the subdivision streets being new from new construction in the early 2000s. 2015 had dropped to a 74. 2020, we were up to an 81, and now in 2025 here at an 86. And 90% of the village's roadways are in good or better, and 10% at fair or worse. And you can see pretty low percentage in poor and very poor. So as I stated before, you can see the amount of roads that the village has in excellent and very good condition, and that's a result of not only the amount of paving that we've been doing, but also that preventative maintenance that I was discussing to keep those roads in that excellent and very good condition for a longer period of time. And everyone was handed out an exhibit that shows the rating for each street throughout town. This does assume that the 2025 road program has been completed, and that the streets in Marquee Point have been paved as well as they're scheduled to be paved in 2025 by the developer. So this is kind of as if we were, fall of 2025, what the condition of the roads would look like. A comparison to 2015, 2020, and 2025, so you can see how we've been able to increase the amount of excellent roadways and very good, decrease the good and fair, and keep less in the poor and very poor. So you can kind of see how we've been able to go from where we were in 2015 up to where we are now in 2025. So budget analysis, what scenarios did we run? Scenario 1 was do no improvements other than the village currently has 3 STP projects funded for the next 5 years. That would be Douglas Road / Avenue from 30 all the way to the village limits, Gordon Road from Concord to Route 30, and Lakewood Creek from Route 30 to Concord. So those projects are funded through Kane Kendall Council of Mayors. We're committed to doing those projects, but if we were to do no other work, we ran that scenario. If we wanted to maintain a current rank of 86, what would we need to spend, maintain current spending, and then if we average a yearly spending of a reduced amount, and that accounts for a contribution to the water fund starting in fiscal year 29, which Michelle will kind of talk about how that impacts both. I'll show you how it impacts the road program, and we'll show you how it impacts the rates. So as you can see, if you were to do no improvements, the future rank in 2030 would be a 79. Our current budget, if we continue with our current spending, the future rank would be a 91, and we'd be at a resurfacing cycle of about 13 and a half years. If we adjust the CIP budget for the contribution to the water fund, we would be a resurfacing cycle of 17 years, and our future rank would be an 88. Then if we wanted to maintain our current rank of an 86, we would be at a resurfacing cycle of about 26 years. Generally speaking, you want to be somewhere in the 15 to 20 year range for your resurfacing cycle. Roads are typically designed to last about 20 years. So I think, we would recommend being in that 15 to 20 year cycle. Prior to starting the IRP and our funding prior to that, we were on a once every 53 years. So, we've come a long way since implementing that, the infrastructure road program. So next steps, looking to identify a target budget, get your feedback on that, and then we will be coming forward with a 5-year plan for your review. And then we would put together the draft report and approve the port and 5-year plan at a future meeting. And then look to start doing design engineering for the 2026 road program. Then lastly, as always, we will continue to review the budget on a yearly basis and make any changes. You know, if other projects come up, other things come up, funding isn't where it is, we can make those changes as typical. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, sir.
I have a question. Of course, right. So if I understand this correctly, we would finish all of the roadways in Montgomery this year, correct? Or 2025 budget or 2026 budget?
We would finish the 5-year plan.
That was
The 5-year
previously
plan.
approved, yeah. So our 5-year plan ends in construction year 25 this summer. So we're looking to do a new 5-year plan, basically, which is why we retested the streets. And that's what our the goal of this is to review the budget options, come up with a budget, and then ultimately bring forward a new 5-year plan.
Okay. So everything that has been worked on in this current 5-year plan, based on your graph here, doesn't need to be touched for at least 10, 15, 20 years?
Probably at least 10 years.
Probably, okay.
Yep, I mean, if we're shooting for that 15 to 20 years, generally speaking, we shouldn't be, you know, ideally, you're not back to that street again for another 15 years. So whatever we pave this year in 2025, generally speaking, we'd be looking to not get back to there again until 2040.
2040, okay. Got it, thank you.
So I do have a question. So out in subdivision out west, Blackberry Crossing West, Ryland built that subdivision, and they put neck downs on Concord Drive in a couple of spots. But they also put neck downs within the subdivision on streets, residential streets. Is there any plan to remove those? Because those are quite problematic when people park in those neck downs. For instance, on Secretariat between Majestic Prince and Ferdinand Lane, it neck downs right there. And on one side of the road, there's no parking, but then when people park on the other side of the road, it's pretty difficult to make a right-hand turn on the Secretariat, and the school bus cannot do it. If somebody parks in front of that one house, the school bus cannot make a right-hand turn without going in the opposite lane of Majestic Prince or running over the curb. I don't know why Ryland put those within the subdivision. I get the Concord, right? But is there any plan to remove those neck downs in the subdivisions?
It's not something we had looked at. However, given your concern and you bringing it up, it's something that we can look at when we're in that area. And I will say, generally speaking, that area is probably going to be one of the areas that we're going to target either in 26 or 27 in a future 5-year plan, because it's one of the few areas that has not been touched in the last 10 years. So that's definitely something that we will look into.
Okay, yeah, I'd appreciate that, because people complain about it all the time, so.
I hadn't noticed that. I was looking it up on my phone.
Yeah, it's the only subdivision. I don't know why Ryland did that. They're just like random throughout the subdivision.
So you're looking for us to give you some opinion guidance on how aggressive to maintain moving forward based on this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're looking to get an idea on a budget that you guys are comfortable moving forward. Do we want to maintain what we're doing? And you probably can't make that decision until you see the next presentation, because they're kind of hand in hand involved. If you're going to, you know, want to contribute some of that IRP money to the water fund to try and see what that does to the rates. But yes, that will be ultimately what we're looking forward to, so we can try and come up with a 5-year plan that fits that budget, those budgets.
So if we reduce the budget, can we get more stop signs?
All kinds of stuff.
So to sum up this presentation, we're doing a great job on streets. Our sales tax referendum was for the improvements of infrastructure. And so we're doing such a good job on roadways that we may have some additional funding from that sales tax that can now go to water, which is also infrastructure, to help alleviate those costs. Am I summing that up properly?
Correct. I think in our opinion, we're probably fixing the streets a little bit faster, or we will be fixing the streets a little bit faster than they need to if we continue spending what we're spending. And because of that, we feel like there's an opportunity to try and spread that money to other infrastructure other than just the roads.
And my other takeaway from this presentation is pavement condition index, learn it, live it, love it, basically?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm pretty sure I did see that X-ray shuttle bus thing at a Bears-Packers game one day. Yeah.
So I wasn't on the board when the ordinance was passed for the 1% sales tax, and it was sold pretty much for the roads. So you're saying that the ordinance is written in such a way that we can utilize that fund for water main replacement, or is not going to be an issue with that?
Yeah, the referendum question, I think Jeff gave me one. I don't know if he gave you one.
No.
Okay, so it says, shall the Village of Montgomery, in order to maintain and/or improve the village's roads and public infrastructure, and to avoid the imposition of other taxes and fees, impose a 1% sales tax for expenditures on public infrastructure or property tax relief. So staff's opinion is that this does comply with that.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're
Yeah.
within the ordinance.
That was one of the first questions I had when I found out about it. I wanted to know how the ordinance was written and what verbiage was in it.
Right. Okay, perfect.
Any other questions on roads? Probably need to just set this aside for the next 2 hours, and then we'll come back to it,
In and that for now.
because I think it'd be premature to tell you, give you direction until then.
Understood.
Oh, yeah.
Is this another,
No, oh, no.
All right, Chris, thank you.
I know that
Thank
you
you.
put this in our
I was gonna
packet.
say, that looks like a bigger packet.
It's not even stapled. You can't even get a staple through this thing.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
I have a meeting in Bloomington tomorrow morning at
you.
9. Will we be out of there by now?
All
Oh,
depends
boy.
on, all depends on you. This is, so we continue our, 5 or 10-year program of trying to learn everything we can about public water supplies. So
Still
this
not
one,
ready for
this
quiz.
lecture is going to be on setting rates.
Yeah.
That's why Pete brought popcorn. He didn't tell us we had this. That's why he brought popcorn.
12:30, 1 o'clock, something, one time.
Is Doug watching this meeting? Does anyone know?
I hope the guy's listening, for Pete's sake.
Why do I get 2?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
You can probably move
Thank
it,
you.
try and get it out of the way, but I don't think it's completely minimized.
This will be delicious later.
Yeah, it's going to flush it right now.
We're just gonna let it go. We'll try to talk quick. I don't know, you're like really trying to distract us with food.
Hey, Michelle, can you try and move the,
I did, and it
it won't move?
can't, I can move it?
That might be better. Because on Chris's, there's some, you have years on the bottom of this that might,
Yep. Pardon? Hide video panel?
yeah, do that one.
Ooh.
Freeman never did that. All right, you ready to roll?
Yes,
All
thank you very much for having us here. Yes, it is a long one, but hopefully filled with good information to help you make an informed decision. I'm Michelle Petrowski with Engineering Enterprises. I know many of you. I just would like to introduce Emily Conti. She's been the backbone and helping with some of the data, so just wanted to recognize her. And then Pete's going to help out with some of the beginning part of the presentation, just for some of the background. So with that, I will move on. Just an understanding, we'll go through the background, do some rate setting goals, look at water use projection assumptions, look at historical and projected expenses, some key assumptions in preparing the rate options that you should be aware of. Then we'll review the rate options themselves, look at some bill comparisons, and then we'll summarize and add some comments and look for board direction on some action items. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pete.
So you've seen these exhibits in the past. It's the village's existing water system. It's complex. There's a lot of moving parts to it. It takes a lot of energy and manpower to maintain it. That's not going away. Yes, we're going to transition to a new supply, but we still have elements of this system that are always going to be in place. So, next one. We maintain 3 pressure zones in the village. We have multiple elevated tanks controlled by SCADA. Again, we'll be managing our water a little differently in the future, but still managing it. The investment that you all made in SCADA is very important to help that process. We'll be adding additional storage to the village at the receiving stations where Lake Michigan water will be coming in, but all of the storage that we have in the system will be integral to making it work. It's going to be a little different than what we're used to. As we sit here today, you're able to turn wells on and off as you need them. In the future, we're going to be relying on a continuous feed from the DuPage Water Commission, and they would appreciate that you don't have too much fluctuation. So hence, we'll have a little more storage so that we can have the buffers to maintain that. But I think the other thing that we wanted to just remind everybody in, and mainly for the audience perhaps, is that you all are very familiar with the challenges that we have here. We've started looking at this probably 15 years ago when we started to be concerned with the deep sandstone and the mining of the deep sandstone. All the projections that Illinois State Water Survey have done has indicated that it's only going to continue to get worse. This exhibit that you see on the page just shows the areas that we're looking to see desaturated in the future. Joliet is kind of the poster child for that. They're also going off the aquifer, but the state has taken that into account in their projections, and there's still going to be a continued decline. So the aquifer that we've used for a long, long time is just not going to be reliable in the future. So I think the decision, we knew that we had to go to an alternate source. We went through a very complex analysis to determine which one. We decided on Lake Michigan. I think it was a wise choice, and now we continue to move on. Next slide. This is another indication of what happens. You've got a lot of historic data. The well levels have been dropping since they were drilled, basically. There's no stopping it. We're just taking more water out of the system than's being put in. Our geographic or geologic location here is such that there's a cap over the aquifer, the so-called Maquoketa Shale, that keeps ground or surface water and rainwater from getting to the deep sandstone, so we take it out faster than it can be put back. And we are starting to get into a point where we've got risks of well problems, because the further you desaturate the formation, the more likely you're going to have problems with water quality, maybe entrainment of sand, which we've had from time to time, and other things. So again, it's an expensive proposition to move to another supply, but in our case, there wasn't really a choice. It isn't something that we just frivolously move forward with. So we just wanted to remind everybody that that's why we're here, and it's a continuation of the discussions we've had over the last few years. So now is the time to figure out how to pay for it all, and that's really what the start of this process is. Michelle's going to outline the revenue study to determine, what the best course of action will be for the village, but it isn't something that we had a choice about. We just have to move forward. So I'll turn it back. Oh, well, I guess just the last thing I will say before we get into this in order to get the Lake Michigan water, you all remember that we have to get our non-revenue water below 10%. We started out when we made our submittal 30.8%. So this is something that's been concerning us for a long time, but Finance, Public Works have done an awesome job of inventorying, getting after, correcting problems, responding to our water loss, and we're seeing some real benefits to all the hard work that they've done, along with a lot of the main replacements that we've already done. So I think there's going to be an opportunity that we're going to see later tonight that we had committed on a certain course with the DNR to get to the 10%. It looks like we're way well ahead of our schedule, so I think we're going to have an opportunity now to back off a little bit on our water main replacement program. I think you'll see that as we get through the presentation, but I wanted to just preview that for you because it's an expensive amount of money that we're putting forward for replacement of main. And we've always felt like DNR, wanted us just to replace all pre-1970 main. And the fact of the matter is that the pre-1970 main isn't necessarily at its design life. And so we're always reluctant to replace anything that hasn't really given us full service. So we think there's an opportunity now to maybe pause our replacement program and reevaluate a little bit. So Michelle will get into the nuts and bolts of that as she goes through the presentation, but I just wanted to make that point because it's honestly better than I think any of us expected. So thank you.
So along with the water main replacement, that was probably the most costly investment out of the non-revenue water reduction program. But there's been many other things that we've been doing have had a large amount of success. The customer meter replacement program, which is going to be completed in this upcoming year, has been very helpful. Billing has really revamped, and they do a lot of checks and making sure they're doing all the accounting right of the water. They modify not only the build usage, or they not only modify like a billed dollar amount, but they also modify the volume if there's an error. So like just doing some house cleaning stuff, have done a wonderful job. Metering and billing of the auto flushers. There's multiple auto flushers throughout the village. Those auto flushers just had a timer on them, and we estimated how much water use is there. Now there's an actual meter on them, so we have a harder number to use for that, which was very helpful. And then another significant find is we found that there was water recirculating through one of the meters, just as an operational issue with the ground storage tank and the lime softening treatment plant. So when we combined all those, we've had some successes. Getting into the water main replacement specifically, knowing what a large investment that is, once again, this was really driven by the application for our Lake Michigan permit with IDNR, but we had an aggressive approach to replace over 20% of 137 miles of water main, and doing that over the course of a short period of time. And the one thing I will note is we have had some success with that water main replacement. River Street was a good example. That main was in pretty bad shape and felt like that was definitely contributing. So there has been some success and money well spent in doing what we've done. With that, this is the program laid out. You can see we're at 27 miles worth of main right now. With that, we have, with all those measures put in place, this is kind of the trajectory we've gone down with our non-revenue water. So the blue is what's pumped into the system. The green is what's billed out. And the difference is that non-revenue water between those two, which is in the red line. And the non-revenue water percentage that IDNR requires it to be less than 10% is that dotted line here. The 2024 data is estimated at this time and is subject to change slightly. just with the billing changeover, that sort of thing, just getting the last bit of data for that water year 2024, which is October 1 of 2023 to September 30th of 2024. We just got some of that data today, so we'll be finishing it, but it is estimated for right now, but we're pretty dialed in. With that, this is the non-revenue water reduction schedule that was set forth in our application to IDNR for Lake Michigan permit. So those green dashes are what we said we were going to be at those different years. The red line is what we are actually at. And you can see 2024, water year 2024, we were supposed to be a little over 25%, and we're sitting between 12 and 13% right now. So have made a lot of progress from the great work of Public Works and billing or finance. With that, the question comes into mind is, should we suspend the water main replacement program? We would certainly talk with IDNR, explain things with them of how we've gotten to this point if we go this route. But we're suggesting suspending it, reevaluating, prioritizing the main, maybe in a different way. So that's the big question on the table is, as of construction year 2026, all the water mains going in for this year, but in 2026, would we want to suspend that water main program and possibly do something different by fiscal year 2029? We're suggesting putting $2 million a year. So take a few years off, evaluate everything we've been doing, see where our non-revenue water falls, and then come up with a revised plan for that water main replacement. So with that, we forget about the other part of what this what this fund covers, and that's the wastewater side. Yes, we get our wastewater from Fox Metro. Fox Metro services the larger interceptor sewers, but the village still has to maintain a significant amount of infrastructure with over 70 miles of water main, a couple lift stations, a ton of manholes, as you can see by the slide. So we still have to take care of that. There is, so I'll just mention that. So with that, let's talk about rate setting goals. What are we trying to accomplish here? With that, this is generally what we're trying to do. We're trying to make our revenues essentially match our expenses. And the key thing there is you want to maintain your reserve based on the village's policy, which in this case is 160 days of operating expenses. And keeping in mind that your operating expenses are going up with Lake Michigan Water. You're going to have purchased water costs, you're going to have debt service, higher level of debt service. So that amount you're keeping in the bank is going to increase in future years. The other key thing that I'll just allude to is the framework of time. Typically, we really focus hard on the 5-year. Honestly, that's what you can plan for in a reasonable time frame. The reality is the village is going through a significant undertaking with DWC, and there is going to be a lot of debt taken out. And in talking with finance, we feel like we had to look at the longer time frame, go out to closer to 2050, just to see all these facilities that we're constructing now, we're going to eventually have to rehab those, and those are significant costs. So that will come in this time frame. And if you're bonded out on all the improvements right now, I think a lot of those debt service payments are going out to 2064. You're most likely going to want to pay cash for that, is my understanding in talking with finance. And so just making you aware of the goal and why we looked a little closer, even though the numbers aren't perfect, we did really try to look at that 25-year a little harder than we normally would, understanding the circumstances. So with that, let's talk about water use projections and assumptions. when we were doing the planning studies and figuring how large the facilities need to be, we often, we need to be conservative, in the sense of, you don't want to turn people away if they need water, so the population is inflated a little bit more. Well, when you're doing the rate studies, it's the opposite conservatism. You want to, because if you say you have too many people and you're projecting out your water, then you're not going to have enough revenue. So we did, for the planning study, for all the improvements, how they were sized, we used the 2050 CMAP population, which was just under 40,000. For the revenue study here, we assumed 36 people per year, approximately 12 homes per year, after talking with staff, including community development. So with that, we take that population and then we look at historically, how do you use water, residential, commercial, industrial, and then we basically project out what your water use per capita is in every one of those categories. So we assume you add 36 people, you multiply the 36 people times the water use per capita. A few things to note, as you can tell by that graph up top, the water use is trending downward, generally speaking, but it did change through COVID. You can see it bounces up and down. So we were semi-conservative of the numbers we took moving forward. So once we projected out our water use, then you can then work with the rates to get an appropriate rate that works. On the flip side, we start looking at the historical and projected expenses. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of new expenses that come with the new water source. And this slide does not incorporate all of the expenses. These are like the additional expenses, major additional expenses that you're not experiencing right now. The dark blue is the debt service payments. You can see are fairly small in 2024. I think it's 100 or 200,000, but you can see it ramps up to 10 to 12 million at the end of it. Then you have DWC or DuPage Water Commission buy-in costs. That's, I think, $333,000 a year that you'll be paying annually for some of those improvements. And then you're going to actually have the purchased water costs. So adding that all in, there's significant amount of costs on top of, you're still going to have to maintain your other system, and so these are just the additional costs to be aware of. So with that, something to consider, and this is not atypical, but you look at fixed revenues versus variable revenues, and then fixed expenses versus variable expenses. The reality is most of your expenses are fixed. You have salaries, you have vehicles to maintain, they're fixed. Your only variable expenses currently are your gas and electric, basically. And in the future, it will include purchased water. But on the revenue side, you have your fixed service charge, and you have your variable rate, your volumetric rate, your rate per thousand. And you can see most of your revenues currently are being made up of volumetric revenues, yet most of your expenses are fixed. And once again, this is not uncommon, but making an effort, especially given the amount of debt service that's going to be coming up, to balance that a little bit more is highly recommended. So let's get into some of the assumptions on the rates. Boulder Hill fee, there's a $15 a month fee on their bill currently, and that will continue until the beginning of fiscal year 2040, and that's to pay for the water main that was previously constructed. We assume that, pardon me, we assume that non-revenue water will be 9.9%. You basically, if you're not billing it, you still got to pay DWC for it. We know we need to be under 10%, so we left it at 9.9, given we're over that at this point.
I have a question.
Sure.
On the 9.9, is it ever feasible that we could get to a situation where at like 4 or 5% as far as non-revenue water loss?
Yes, it is. It's very uncommon to get that low, and it's all about the investment you want to make on your system, and sometimes it just doesn't pay to get that low.
Okay.
It depends, but you can. Depends on how much you want to invest.
And is there ever a situation, I'm going to use California as an example, where they were going through extreme drought, and say we come into a situation where we're going through extreme drought, and I see these graphs that show purchased water, and it's a certain level. When we join DWC, is there ever a limit on the amount of water that we can purchase? Say we get into a drought situation where we need more water for whatever reason, or say there's more users or big users that come into the village. Will we ever be restricted to the capacity that we could take? Or is Lake Michigan considered a never-ending supply?
And Pete can speak to this a little bit more, but I believe you do have a maximum amount, but the real, what they encourage is they have you have a stronger amount of storage. You're going to build 2 times your average day, so you have that storage. But I believe there are limits, but I was not part of that, so I'll defer to Pete.
So Chicago, Illinois has a unique situation. When in the early 1900s, you all recall, the Chicago reversed the flow of the Chicago River. And in doing so, what that means is that the rainfall that fell in Chicago, it's about a 600 square mile watershed, doesn't go back to the lake, it goes to the Mississippi. So to take water out is classified as a diversion. So through negotiation and actually Supreme Court, there's been a diversion set of 3,200 CFS, which is about 2 billion gallons per day of withdrawal that's allowed by the city of Chicago. Now that includes drinking water, which accounts for about 1 billion gallons per day, but also water to account for losses in the lock and dam system, account for rainfall that's diverted, and to help manage the sewage that goes into the Chicago River. So, Trustee Youngerman, there is a fixed amount. It's set by Supreme Court decree. But on top of that, then, each person that gets water from Lake Michigan gets an allocation. And so the village will have an allocation of a certain amount of water. Now, they haven't, there's some allowance for fluctuation in that, but they would like you to stay within your allocation if you can. Each year, it gets revisited, so you can request more, but generally on a year-to-year basis, they kind of want you to stay in that allocation amount. The other thing that Michelle mentioned earlier was the reason we used a higher population projection was to make sure the pipeline had enough capacity for us, because that's the other thing that would limit the amount of water we can get, is whether it can be moved through the DuPage Water Commission. And understand, every community is going to be in that same position of having, drought condition and wanting more water. So there's kind of a, it's a communal effect that everybody's going to try to stay within their allocation, and therefore there'll be enough water for everybody. We may have to restrict watering, which we would recommend doing in any case, but we're not going to run out, and we're going to have plenty of water, but we may have to manage it a little bit in a drought, I would say.
Is there ever a situation where if we're doing, and I'm going to do this in the simplest of terms, say at the beginning of the year, we have to purchase 2 million gallons, right? And I know that it's way off, but say we have to purchase 2 million gallons where the village is using 2 million gallons worth of water per year. And as time goes by, over the years, we see, well, we're not really using 2 million gallons of water. We're using 1.5 million or 1.75 million or whatever. Does our purchased water cost go down? Can we start to bring it down?
We only pay for what we use. So at each one of the receiving stations that comes into the village, there's a metering station. It's kind of the handoff from the DuPage Water Commission to the village, and it's metered through there. So we pay DuPage Water Commission for every gallon that they deliver to us. If we don't use it, if we have a successful water conservation program and reduce our per capita consumption, which is happening sort of whether we have a dedicated program or not, because the fixtures and, washing machines and toilets are getting more efficient. So, there's been a kind of a regional and a national decline in per capita consumption for some time. But anyway, we'll just pay less. So, and that is the real strength of getting into a conservation program, is that if you use less water, you purchase less water, right? So that's an advantage to all of us, if that's the case.
Thank you. I apologize for interrupting. So those questions I wanted to ask, so thank you.
No, it's an important topic. You're fine. You're welcome to do so. So with that, any other questions on the non-revenue water?
No, I do. And just to add what trustee. Thank you. Thank you, Siri.
Siri has a question.
We actually had that situation years ago in the village. Pete probably remembers this, where we had a drought and we had to put a restriction, a moratorium on watering your lawns, because we literally could not pump enough water to keep up with the usage. And we had to go out and enforce it. And once we did that, the problem went away. So Pete's absolutely right. That's what you do. You put restrictions on use immediately when you have a drought condition. My question is hydrant flushing. Once we go to this purchased water, right now we flush hydrants twice a year. Are we still going to flush hydrants twice a year or once a year? Or how are we going to, because that's going to account for some of that.
So
that
it's
non-revenue
been discussed. It's definitely something that's on our radar. And again, we're always evolving in this process. So we're talking about the water main replacement program. And what was originally identified was a key factor. Now, when we talk about suspending that, it changes things a little bit for us, because again, we were at a higher rate of replacement. And so therefore, we felt more comfortable in reducing that frequency down to once per year. But something that we're going to continue to monitor as we move forward. Not to mention the fact that our water source is changing, so the chemistry of water is changing.
Right.
So that'll be an effect that we'll have to monitor once that transition happens. But yes, it's something that we're very cognizant of, is now that we're purchasing water versus producing our own, obviously that cost has increased, and we're going to take a really close look at that and make sure we're staying where we need to with compliancy, and also staying where we need to be with our quality of water producing to, or furnishing to our residents.
And we may be able to reduce, instead of flushing the whole system, because we do that now because of contaminants and stuff in the water, rust and other things, which we shouldn't have with the new water source. So we may be able to dial back and just flush certain areas for chlorine residual, correct? I mean.
Correct. I mean, you bring up a great point. When we pump water out of the aquifer, it's a higher concentration of iron, which is what Trustee Geyer's referencing. So yeah, the quality of Lake Michigan water is different. It's a different consistency. So something, again, that we'll continue to monitor. And that's our goal, is to reduce that as much as we possibly can. And we may implement that into districts and do it in smaller quantities throughout the year, or throughout multiple years.
Is there any way to project that through water modeling, just knowing the usage of water and how much, because, obviously on the bigger transmission mains and what comes off of those, you're going to have a pretty good chlorine residual, but when you get to some of the outlying areas, is there a way to model that to tell what you're going to have to flush for chlorine residual?
It is a different type of model that we're planning on creating. It's called an extended period simulation model versus a steady state, not to get too far into the weeds. Steady state's just a snapshot, here are your flows, but you can do an extended period simulation and model the water quality. So yes, we may, to see residuals and that sort of thing, you can, but it is a higher level of effort.
Well, you know me, I like to get into the weeds. So.
We think the extended period simulation is going to be important for us to size our, the storage that we put at the receiving stations, because we want to just make sure that we're balancing things and giving enough flexibility to the water operators so that they can manage the system effectively. And you can't do that, as Michelle says, with just like a fire flow model. You really need to run it for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours to pick up the ebbs and flows, and just to make sure that you can maintain that steady pressure throughout the village. And as I said, there's going to be a premium on being able to maintain a constant draw from DuPage Water. And, you know, we may have to invest in a little more storage at the receiving stations to do that, and that'll be determined when we get into that design. And I think we're planning on probably rechlorinating at those locations. But, you know, if we find that we're having problems with chlorine residual in the system, we may have to have some intermediate areas where we rechlorinate too. So we'll see. I mean, some of this, it's almost impossible to deal with at this point in time, but eventually, you know, this is something we'll be looking at, so.
And I will tell you, we work with several other Lake Michigan communities, and I do a lot with the non-revenue water stuff, and most of them, they all flush. You have to. There's a reality to it. So just kind of prepping you, there will be flushing
Sure, yeah.
that will need to occur.
Just wonder if we can reduce the flushing, that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's different programs too. You could look at a unidirectional program where you're, you know, maybe a little more strategic, higher flows to get through it. So we can look at that.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on, Stantec pro forma. Basically, Stantec had done all the projections for debt service, how much to bond out, that sort of thing. We had come up with the capital improvement plan, and then they ran the numbers, and we took those numbers and plugged them into our rate study. With that, there were some items that we did take out of this. Well, 16 and 17, we took out, as well as the DWC lump sum buy-in costs, because instead we're paying an annual payment of $333,000. So it was taken out. And I think the thought process was there is we don't have an immediate need for the wells 16 and 17, and not anticipated at this time. So with that, no increase or decrease to any of the electric, gas. You're going to have other facilities, but in theory, it might be a little less. But until those facilities are up and running, we don't have that number, and it's probably small in comparison to the other numbers we were looking at. Another large assumption is the DWC rate. Right now, the rate the village will pay from DWC is semi-unknown. We do have an estimate that's not necessarily for Montgomery, pardon me, of $2.74 a 1,000 gallons, and then it's like a 1.35% escalation factor. That is different. That's just the cost of service, right? There's a different, you know, sometimes they've just charged a rate in the past. This is cost of service. This is assuming you're not paying for everybody else's water. It's just the cost that it is to serve you. So with that, we'll look at some rate option assumption, additional rate option assumptions. The water main replacement approach and phasing. So we'll get into this a little bit, but we do have an option with suspending that $48 million. And then we look at adding $2 million a year starting in fiscal year 2029, so you can kind of compare those and get a feel for that. The potential, we also explore the potential use of the infrastructure fund to reduce the water rate. So the money on the roads, if you elect not to do that, the $2 million, that if that was then applied to the water fund, that would equate to about $17 a month. Currently, we have that all built into the variable rate, but there is an option to possibly just take that $17 off as a fixed fee too. But right now, it is all added in with the volumetric rate for all the options shown. The sanitary sewer maintenance costs and funding. For the sanitary sewer, currently, there is nothing projected in the CIP for sanitary sewer maintenance into the future. We're suggesting adding $4 a month on to your existing $2 service fee, and then we would in turn replace that, or we would do improvements with that money and develop a program so that we're maintaining the sewer side of things too. Another large assumption was the unincorporated to incorporated rate. Currently, the unincorporated areas pay about 20% more than the incorporated. We understand that things are changing, that a lot of their water mains have been replaced. Things are converging a little bit more when you look at that ratio. So we're suggesting over the next 10 years going from 20% more to making those equal is what's assumed in all the rates. So that's those are some of the major assumptions. Now let's get into the fun of the rate options themselves. So we looked at three major items. We did all the water main as is, where we're not suspending that $48 million. Then in option 2 and 3, and you'll see we have A, B, and C because they're different rate options for each one of those. But for number 2, we're suspending this $48 million, so suspending that program starting in 2026. And then we are we're adding $2 million a year for water main replacement starting in fiscal year 2029, but we're assuming no utilization of those infrastructure funds. 3 is the same thing as 2, except you are using $2 million for the infrastructure funds. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
So with that, the A, B, and C's are all similar too. So we do, for each one of the options, A is just current rate structure as is. We do no changes to the rates except for what's in the ordinance. B is, we looked at establishing a fixed fee, building that up over a 10-year period such that we add on the cost of the debt service in the fixed fee. So in this case, it's $8 a month for 10 years. So at the end of 10 years, you'd have $80 plus your current $3 fee. So it'd be an $83 fixed fee, and then everything else is made up with your variable rate increases. And then 1C is, we know we have more fixed fees than just the debt service, salaries, et cetera. So this covers the debt service plus some of those fixed fees. It's still not making the pies right completely, but we're getting closer. So with that, everything else would be made up in the volumetric rates for C. So that's 1A through 1C. Then you get to 2A, 2C. It's the same thought process here. Current rates is A. B is doing your debt service, but your debt service is less because you're not doing that $48 million. So it's about $6 a month annual increase for 10 years, so that's $60 fixed fee. And then C is, once again, adding a little bit more to cover some more of those fixed fee expenses. 3A is the same, three, just to reiterate, you're suspending the $48 million. You're adding the $2 million in water main replacement annually. But then you're supplementing that with $2 million a year $2 million a year from the infrastructure fund. And the A, B, and C are the same. Current rates cover the debt service is B, and then 3C is covering the debt service plus some additional fixed expenses. So with that, we put some graphs together. So this is for option number 1A. You can see current rates. This is cumulative expenses through 2050 over cumulative revenues. You want those two lines to generally run in parallel and be pretty close. You can see they diverge. It's just not financially sustainable with the current rates. So then you go to option 1B, the blue, and the expenses, they're running a little bit closer together, making this potentially more viable, a more viable solution. And this next slide is still 1B, but it is looking at expenses versus revenues on an annual basis. And the thing I will point out here, I don't know if you, but you can see in like the 2020s, we're building up, your debt service is adding on. And then you have, like in the 30s, you'll hit a nice, everything's new, everything's wonderful, you'll maintain your existing stuff, you'll have your typical ongoing expenses. But then when you get to the, into the 40s, later 40s, you start having some really major expenses that we're anticipating you won't be able to bond for. So you can see the expenses are starting to outweigh the expenses are outweighing the revenues in the end. So you're going to build reserves to pay for those expenses, and it's being that discipline to building the reserves if this is the approach we'd like to take. So in this next slide, still option number 1B, is the green is basically your cash balance, right? It's where you're at in the bank account, and the blue line is your cash reserves. So ideally, your cash balance and your cash balance and that reserve is equaling each other. It's not a perfect fit if we're trying to smooth out the rates. You don't want it to go, increase it 25% and then increase it 2% and then maybe negative %.
Right, and the blue is is our policy.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Correct. So with that, some years you'll build up your reserve, but you can see in the latter years you're taking it down. So this is making, at the end of 2050, we're saying we're short a little under $1 million. So much is going to change between now and 2050. We just want to make sure we're getting to a rate that's possible, and this is still feasible, like you don't know if that receiving station, can I push it one more year before we rehab? We'll be evaluating that. So this is, wanted to get possible, and it's not going to be right on, and tried to minimize the amount we were keeping in reserves during certain periods was the goal. And you can see we fall under in the 2030s. We're going to be building that reserve up. We have so much additional expenses that we need that 160 days of. We're going to be light in the 30s. We could amend it so it's always above, but then your reserves are really above come in the early 2040s. So.
Is that the concerning part of this option 1B, is that 2034-ish year where we're pretty early on in the forecasting of this, meaning timeline like 2034, and to be half of what we.
Yes, and that is the risk. It doesn't mean you have $0 in the bank. It means you're not hitting your policy, your policy reserve.
You can kiss that finance award away, if that's the case.
We will strive. It is worrisome, though.
Yeah, I can see that.
So moving along, this is option 1C, where now we're utilizing that infrastructure funding of $2 million, but still suspending the $48 million. Once again, the lines are, running pretty parallel. And same story with the expenses versus revenues. You're trying to build your revenues up, so in the later years, you can do those larger improvements without bonding. And option 1C, and I should state that all these graphs with the cash reserve policy and the cash amount, they're all at the same scale. So if you set them side by side, they should generally give you a framework of magnitude of how much above you are with the cash reserve policy. So in this situation, you're generally doing well. I will say in the outer years, you can see a hefty decline. You're still short 3.6 million, but once again, you know, generally can fit into things, and who knows what changes. So moving on to 2A. 2A is this current rates. Go ahead. Sure.
So what is the concerning aspect of this option?
This option is, number one, having the discipline to keep your reserves in there. Number two, at the end of 2050, you're short $3.5 million. But that is, there's a lot of things that can change between now and 2050.
Got it.
This fits. Yeah,
I get you.
this fits. You're definitely staying above, which is the positive.
Right. It's going to be, it would be tough, not tough, but I could see a board in 2040 saying we have, I don't know, whatever it is, a year worth of operating expenses. We're holding on to too much money. We forecasted this wrong. We need to lower rates and give some of this money back, knowing that in 2050 and beyond is when we start
That
to do
we're
the maintenance
going
and we're
to.
screwed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that is the concern here, is being disciplined enough to maintain those reserves where they need to be so that we're reaching those future expenses that are coming down the pipeline. No pun intended, but.
We understand the challenges that finance has in paying for all these improvements at this point in time. We know there's still a lot of unknowns out there, and one of the recommendations at the end of this is basically to make sure we're revisiting this pretty frequently and doing another study 3 to 5 years from now. And in addition, Jennifer, I'm sure, will be monitoring what are we supposed to be at, what are we at, because this is very dependent on water use per capita and how people use water.
Sure.
I'm recommending onboarding. This is part of the onboarding. You explain the rate study to them so
Right,
they
yeah.
understand the importance of the reserves. That's my quick advocate. So moving forward, on to 2A. Once again, these are, A is current rates. It does not work. It diverges. 2B, paying paying for the debt service, getting them to align. We're not using any infrastructure fees. Same story with revenues and expenses, building them up so you can use them later on. What does that look? Am I going through those slides too quick? I feel like it's the same story, but just showing them back and forth. So if I am going too quick, please just raise your hand. This slide, it's similar story to the other ones. You're building your cash reserves and needing the discipline. You have a little bit less of a deficit at the end in 2050, but still works, generally speaking. I apologize. Option number 2C, this is now everything for 2B, but now we're using $2 million a year or we're utilizing $2 million from the infrastructure fee to cover us. I'm sorry. We're increasing the debt service plus paying for some additional debt service, or paying for some other fixed expenses, thank you. And we are making these align. You can see expenses are generally running a little, or revenues are running a little higher than expenses in this option. Once again, through your expenses are generally higher than, or your revenues are generally higher than your expenses until you get to the outer years here. So you're accumulating that money. And with that, you have much larger reserves through this, and it's just how you do the increases and how you do percent increases versus the fixed amount. With that, moving on to option 3, and option 3, this is 3A. I apologize, this is the option now that we're adding the $2 million on. This is when we're adding that on. And once again, current rates still don't work. 3B is adding, paying for your debt service, and no money from the infrastructure fee. Or, I'm sorry, you have the infrastructure fee money, but you're paying for part of your debt service with that. Or you're paying for all your debt service, I'm sorry. So moving along, expenses versus revenues, they balance out in the end, but you have the outer years where your expenses are really on the higher side. And here, cash versus your reserves, few years where they don't exactly match up, but generally are pretty good. 3C, now we're doing everything that 3B did, but then we're going to pay for a little more debt service. Or we're going to pay for a little more fixed expenses. So with that, these align fairly well. Same story with expenses versus revenues, building your revenues in certain years so you can pay in the outer years. And you can see these generally align. The areas where they don't align between your cash reserve and your policy is out towards the latter years. So with that, what do these rate options look like in terms of the bill?
Another quick question.
Go ahead.
And I apologize, I was gone during part of the one options. Everything that I've seen, at the end, our cumulative expenses are more than do we have a surplus in any of these options?
If you go back one.
3C.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, even here in 2050, our expenditures are higher than our total revenue.
Yeah, we built up revenue in previous years in your reserves to cover the years that the expenses are more.
So what this slide does not include, this is just your cumulative expenses versus revenues. What it doesn't show is what's in your reserves. So you might have added on, but it may or may not cover your reserves, which is why might be the disconnect.
Okay, thank you.
So the water and sewer bill comparisons, if we're okay, any questions? No one's fallen asleep quite yet? Jeff's thinking about it. Typical monthly residential bill, this is all the options for option 1, A, B, and C. You have current rates in 2030, your bill. This is for an average bill of 5,500 gallons a month. You're at around $65.50. For option 1B, in 2030, you're at $111. Option 1C, you're at $117.50. Going through with option 2A, 2B, 2C, 2B is $107, 2C is $116. All the A options are the same because they're current rates. Option 3, 3A, 3B, 3C, 3B and 3C are right around $98. Option 3C is a little over $97, or a little over $96, closer to $97. So one of the things we wanted to make sure is affordability. We understand these rates are changing significantly, and the IEPA, they say not to exceed 2% of the median household income. So what we did is we looked at Montgomery and Boulder Hill. We looked at the census information, got their median household income from 2016 and 2020, and then we did the annual growth rate from there to project it out to 2030, and came up with an annual affordability amount. For Montgomery, it's about $2,400, and Boulder Hill, it's about $1,743. Then what we did is we did community comparisons, and we plugged in the affordability. The top red line you'll see is the Montgomery's affordability marker, where the dotted red line is Boulder Hill. With that, these are the incorporated rates shown here in 2030. If you recall, we're going out 10 years to make those converge, so this is the incorporated rates. A few things to know. Typically, in past, when we've done these rate studies, we typically looked at Yorkville, Oswego, all your local communities. With this, we felt we weren't quite doing justice without looking at other DuPage Water Commission entities. And then also, it's probably worth noting that Yorkville and Oswego, it's our understanding, they have not done any of the rate increases to account for these Lake Michigan improvements yet. So when we're comparing these, that's why they're hatched out. It's not a full comparison. The other item I'd mention, there are other DWC communities. Why did we pick these? Because they also, these communities are served by a wastewater authority or a sanitary district similar to Montgomery. So we took all the other ones that have their own wastewater treatment plan because you don't know where they put their money at. So really wanted to be apples and apples. And you can see we're under that affordability mark, which was a positive, and what we're striving to do. Another key component is this is a workshop on a Saturday morning back in January of 2023. Some of you may recall, this is the same slide from there. You'll see that the projected rate was $113.78 at the time. That did not include a sanitary fee increase. We had added in that $4. So when you look at that, where does that projection fall? Where did we think we would be? Are we still in line with what the public knew at the time, with what board members knew at the time? We added the $4 on, and you can, for the sewer, and you can see that all the rate projections in 2030 are now still under that threshold. So in summary, and some comments and action items, first of all, select the rate, the selected rate. It needs to cover your operations, your debt service, your maintenance reserve, and your capital improvements. Otherwise, you have to get the funds from some other location within your budget. All the A options, the current rates, are not financially stable or financially sustainable. All the B options are subject to greater availability in revenues received because they have a higher volumetric rate. If you cover more of your costs, like the option C, then you have less variability in droughts or high or wet periods. And a key thing to just note is the rates are really dependent on the water use trends and population growth. So if something changes there, that's another reason to come take a look at your rates sooner rather than later. We assume that the switch to DWC occurs in 2032, which is why we were trying to get all of our improvements, water main improvements done by fiscal year 29, or construction year 2029, so that we have it before we connected and prove that we're under 10%. We set rates based on the short-term finances, so we're definitely focused on that 5 years. That's what's solid, but we did project out to 2050 to monitor those long-term expenses. We recommend reviewing the rates frequently to ensure the water fund is self-sufficient. Talking with Jennifer, still recommend every 3 to 5 years, especially if changes happen and recur. Consider transparency of the DWC and Chicago Department of Water rate on the bill. That fluctuates, and, there was a time where they had 4 years where they increased their rate by, City of Chicago increased their rate by like 15% for 4 years in a row. A lot of communities do not pass that on to their residents, and as a result, they started doing less and less CIP items. So it's just something, transparency there. If you're showing them what it is, then when you're doing that rate increase, it helps justify it and explain it. The other item that I did not mention earlier, but will mention now, is for all the commercial and industrial users, we added on a $10 fixed fee. And it will just be part of the base service charge fee. It won't be a separate fee. It will just get added on. And the idea is the facilities, the storage, the supply, you need to size those to meet the fire flow for these buildings. You're maintaining larger water mains. They have a higher demand. So this is just it costs more to service them or maintain the facilities that we need for them. And I'm sure as we get through the billing software, there's other ways we can look at that, but there was limitations with some of the information with the older software that we could not do. We just thought it was easiest just to do an increase of that $10 a month.
Because you could have 200,000 square foot building that uses virtually no water, but we have 12-inch water main sized for fire flow on the chance that you have a fire there. And so your water bill's low, but this is adding a 10, it's a 10, we're increasing your base water fee by $10 just once, right? It's not $10 per year for.
Correct, it's just $10 once. Another item, assumption, just reminding the sanitary sewer maintenance fee, we added that $4 a month and subsequently would have improvements associated with that. The unincorporated and incorporated ratio will equal each other after 10 years. And then it comes down to this, you almost made it through. The decision matrix. So really, this sums up what we need action items or input from the board on to really hone in on the rate. And I guess I'll just leave this as a summary. If you want me to explain more, I can, but I feel.
Fine. Are the ones with the X's in there, those are possible solutions that could work?
They're just saying what it includes. All of these are possible solutions. We took off the A's
That's right.
because
They don't work.
the A's don't work. So the B's and C's generally work. You will have years where you're not meeting your cash reserve policy, but we're trying to keep your reserves down in those outer years is what we tried to do. So this is just kind of summarizing what each option includes and then the bill at the bottom.
Okay. So there's 6 different options here, but it's really kind of tailored to, it looks like 3 different policy decisions. The first one being, sorry, did I cut you off at all?
No.
The first one being, does the board feel comfortable suspending the water main replacement program based on our initial success? Analyze things, be surgical, and then roll a different program out, $2 million per year later.
In the projection, we still have 2025 happening this year, and it looks like that's the largest.
Yeah, that's
That's
the
the largest
19
number
million,
of-
the A, B, C, and D that we brought to you recently. That's that, so.
Yeah,
there's still a large project
There's more
going on.
water main being replaced this year than there were in the last 2 years, so, I mean, I'm comfortable with that based on those numbers. We should be able to reduce even more significantly than we have in the last 2 years,
Sure.
hypothetically.
I should add that I think staff feels it's prudent to suspend it. I think we have, Pete wants to say something, go for it.
Well, I mean, I think to me, it's pretty obvious. We've been successful in our water loss reduction. We had a program that was really mandated by the the DNR. We want to go back to them and explain what we've done, but allowing us to pause this is just, I think, good practice, because it's going to be all hands on deck to build the water main we're going to build in '25. It's going to put a lot of stress on Public Works, Finance, and everybody. We were going to do that because we had to. Now we have an opportunity to pause that. We can always take it back up if conditions change. And I think the other thing that we've always worried about is the low-interest loan program from the state has been our best option for finance. We were fortunate to get $19 million from the state revolving loan fund. If we had our choice, we'd do that for every water main program, but it doesn't always score as high. Now, if we have the ability to take that pause, we can wait 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it is, and go back into the system and get qualified for another low-interest loan program grant. And if we don't get it the year we submit, maybe we get it the next year. So you have way more flexibility. We can get the best financing available. And as I said before, we're not replacing water main that we didn't need to. So I would strongly recommend the pause, just because of the impact it has to village staff, but also just common sense tells you that we need a little time to evaluate. We could have done it, right? But, we don't have to.
Right.
So I don't think any of us thought we'd be as successful as we've been in the last few years with water rate reduction. So, kudos to the village for really jumping on it and getting to where we're at. And so now it affords us an opportunity, I think.
I have a question for Engineer Wallers. So because we're in a position where we've done so well with moving toward getting everything in place, could the DNR, could that affect our, is it a license or a permit to get water? Could they say, hey, come on, speed it up, you guys were doing great, you can go on sooner, you can go online sooner?
There's a couple factors here. We've built into our application that we're going to connect in 2032, so that's part of it. They were okay with that. They don't care when you hook on. We just wanted to make sure we had an allocation. We also have it in our agreements with DWC that we can connect in 2032. I think it would afford you the option to possibly connect sooner. That's something that you could look at in a few years if you wanted to. One of the things that's going to be happening with the Chicago Department of Water and DWC is that, Michelle alluded to it, right now they're on a fixed fee with DuPage Water Commission. Everybody pays the same amount. In the future, Chicago has indicated that they're going to go to a cost of service model. So that means that they compute the amount of money it takes them to treat, produce, and deliver water to the suburbs, to DWC exactly. And Joliet sort of pioneered this. The Grand Prairie Water Commission negotiated a contract so that it's a cost of service model. The significance of that is that it eliminates them tacking on lead line replacements to the water charge. It eliminates other pension liabilities from the water charge. It's just fixed on the cost of production. So that rate won't come into effect until 2030. That's when it's targeted to start. So I don't think we want to connect probably prior to 2030, but I think that would be the first time we have the opportunity to do that. I think you also know that DWC is evaluating other alternatives than City of Chicago. They're actually looking at doing their own treatment facility. So there'll be more to come on that, and we'll be able to see it. But again, I think we'll be afforded some other opportunities down the line. But we have that flexibility built into our DWC contract and our agreement with IDNR. And as Michelle mentioned, if you all think it's prudent to suspend our $48 million program, we would go to DNR and explain what's going on. We would have a sit-down meeting with them so that they're on board with the logic. And the strength of it is that we've done so well in that, non-revenue water reduction. So it's not a done deal. I guess they could come back and say, no, we want you to do it. But I don't, their goal has always been compliance, and that's what we've always wanted to do. And, that was the way it was intended to be before we knew how successful we were going to be. So there's work to be done, but I think it's probably better than, I would expect that they would comply with us on that, or work with us.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm guessing there won't be any objection to pausing the $48 million currently, reassessing, okay. Yeah, like from the DNR? Yep. So if you're on board with that, which I'm seeing some heads shaking, yes, then that eliminates the option ones, because that's the only one that continues with the program, correct?
Correct.
So now it's just options 2 and 3, which is both have a B and C. The next policy question is, would you prefer to utilize the $2 million a year from the infrastructure fund for the water main?
I would say yes.
And why?
And I'll tell you why I'm going to say yes. It's the same reasoning that I used for when we instituted this. Again, I wasn't on the board, but as a resident.
Yeah.
And that is that $2 million isn't coming just from the residents, right? Everybody who shops in Montgomery is paying for that. So we're taking a percentage or portion of the burden off of the residents by utilizing that $2 million. And based on the language in the ordinance, I'm fine with that.
Okay. I
By,
agree.
by diverting, maybe diverting isn't the right word.
Not the right word.
Contributing.
By what?
Utilizing.
By utilizing and committing the $2 million to water infrastructure. Engineer Ott, you told us that we could keep, I think the pavement condition index, we could keep a PCI of 86-ish?
We estimate it would go to an 88.
Looking out 5 years, which we'd have to, eventually we would do another 5-year plan and see how it looks. But doing the contribution to the water fund from the infrastructure fund, we would still increase our PCI from an 86 to an 88. Our resurfacing cycle would go up from what it currently is, which is about 13 years, the way that we're currently spending, to 17. But that's still well within our recommended 15 to 20. So yeah, we are comfortable reducing the IRP program to fund some of the water infrastructure projects.
For that 5-year period, starting, I think, in '29 is when we were starting to commit about $500,000 or $400,000 a year to water infrastructure. Would we keep doing that after 2034? Would we continue to do the $400,000 yearly to, if between 2029?
It's 2 million, it'll be a $2 million.
It's not a consistent thing even after that next
Yeah.
5-year plan?
It's $2 million a year.
Per year, for that.
Going forward? Okay.
So we're maintaining an improvement system for the water infrastructure going forward.
And we're still able to maintain our 88 PCI going forward? Or will we,
We'd
will
be
we then need to
reevaluating that after the 5-year period.
reevaluate and maybe redirect some of the
I
funds
would
back?
say there is a chance that in the next 5-year plan that the PCI might have, after it goes up potentially to an 88, there's a chance that you might see a level out and it will go down below the 88. It's still a very manageable and healthy number in the 80s.
88 is outstanding.
And 88 is, I don't have the numbers. It's hard to get research on this, but I would say that probably puts you in the top 5% of communities and on what your overall PCI is. So if you went down to, say, an 84 by 2035, you're still in good shape, in my opinion.
Okay. And the way to continue, I keep harping on this at every meeting, but the way to continue to increase this is annexation, development, and bringing people in to raise our tax base, so.
President Bartley, did you just say the 2 million per year goes on forever? Is that what you said?
Yep, utilizing 2 million of that fund.
Oh.
I guess nothing goes on forever, that we
Well,
do this and
no.
then 5 years, we do the same thing again, and
Because in my head, I was thinking for 5 years, so I'm actually glad you said that, because I thought it was going to be a short time frame. Okay,
Why I asked that question.
Yep.
okay, I'm with you.
And if something, I don't know how legally that gets put into the, like the rate ordinance, but I'm assuming that would be a separate action. So that would have to be something the board would commit to above and beyond.
Are we still, okay, perfect.
Yes?
Not to steer you. So that's option 3s then. So where we're at is either 3B or 3C. As you can see, we could debate this for hours upon hours. It will change the average bill by 61 cents a month.
Well,
But what are the two main differences in those, if you could highlight that?
You're saying from 2C?
Just from 3B to 3C.
3B and 3C is,
a $3 million deficit.
3B, the
I mean,
fixed
you got a
fee will cover
deficit.
your debt service.
Yeah.
3B, yeah, covers your debt service. 3C covers your debt service plus some other additional fixed expenses.
And at the end of 2050, which we know has its own variability in it, there's a surplus as opposed to a projected deficit.
Correct.
So, and what I had seen these graphs before and I have them all out in front of me, the green ones. What I appreciate about the 3C and 3B, but mostly 3C, is that we're not carrying tons of reserves. Because this, for all the folks in the audience, this is what they would say, you're overtaxing us right now. We don't need, and it would take an entire PowerPoint to explain why we need to have it where it is.
2C there?
As opposed
That's
to,
what I
yeah,
just
2C
pointed
is, it's cool looking, but it's awful.
Yeah.
As far as taxing residents, so.
Where is that surplus plan to being held? Is it being used, sitting in an offshore account somewhere?
The surplus sits within our fund balance, so that, again, helps offset some of those expenses on those years where we have that deficit spending that would come out of the reserves. But within the fund structure itself, it sits in the equity account.
And it's restricted.
It is.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not being pulled out for any other,
No, I typically invest that money to try to get some return on it.
does the water department or the water fund currently have run surpluses that's being used?
Historically, no.
So these charts and graphs, that's just the water equation. That doesn't include the $4 sewer charge in these graphs? Because that's not really water, right? That's something separate?
It's a water and sewer bill comparison, so it does include the
Does include
$4.
that $4 even in the reserves and everything, so that's
Yep.
all part and parcel. Okay.
Well, the greens probably doesn't have the sewer stuff in there, does it?
That's your water, it's all together.
Got it.
So
Okay,
it
so yes,
is.
it does. All right.
It's not separated out fully in the budget, so it's all inclusive.
But the $4 can only be used for the sewer, right? And not the water? Is that the way we're accounting for that? It's going to be put in reserve fund for,
Right,
For
we'll
sewer.
be using those monies to offset the sewer program that would take shape then thereafter and help with those improvements.
so is the sewer program going to be proactive or reactive? Are we going to do, I guess like the water main or the vehicle reserve fund, we're going to set a time and say we're going to replace them because they've reached a certain age? Or are we going to say we're going to replace them because they've reached a certain condition?
So a couple of things. Number one, we've alluded to this earlier, that our sewer program is kind of non-existent. So number one, step one is analysis of our sewer system. And one of the first steps that we started taking before we had to scale back was creating a sub-basin map of our sanitary system so we could start going through and targeting those areas for sewer evaluation programs. We did one program in the Route 25 subbasin before taking over that lift station because it was advantageous for us operationally and logistically. So that's our number one. Based upon those evaluations, we'll determine what our next steps are as far as identifying lining projects. But to really break it down in simplicity, everything that's west of Orchard Road was developed 2000 and after. So PVC pipe. So what we're really going to be targeting is our areas where we have clay tile for sanitary sewer mains, and really looking to capitalize on lining those sections, doing point repairs, and then evaluating the basins as well. So really, that's what we're doing, not turning a blind eye to everything that's west of Orchard Road, because by the time we get through that process, that infrastructure will be needing some work, but also having preventative maintenance measures in there as well for those areas west. So trying to really be proactive is our long-term goal, and not being reactive when we know that we have aged infrastructure in the ground, on top of the fact that there could be regulations passed down from Fox Metro or IEPA that would require us to start ramping up that program. So again, really trying to take a proactive approach to the other major infrastructure that's buried in the ground.
Okay, so the focus is going to be on lining the old clay tiles that are subject to breaking and leakage, and getting them more or less up to snuff with the PVC out west.
That's our assumption. I mean, it'll all be based upon the evaluations, but more than likely, I'm pretty confident in saying, yes, that's going to be our plan of attack, is to line those segments.
Never seen a clay pipe that's not leaking.
No.
They all leak, so, yeah. Yeah, and I guess the reason I asked is because I just want to get a better handle on it. So I was trying to determine, would it be better for us to wait and then just, as we needed repairs, to do the repairs and maybe issue bonds, then tack it on the water. But if you've got a program that you're actually, going to be proactive and get ahead of, then this would be the way to do it, would be the charge and build a reserve.
That's our goal too, because the other side of this is, with doing water main replacement programs, we can identify sanitary sewer in those areas. So again, trying to get the best for our bang for our buck, if you will, by going in with one contractor, doing water main projects, and then also addressing any sanitary point repairs that need to be done, can all be done by one contractor. That means open cut at the same time, so less, asphalt repairs or concrete repairs. So again, trying to get those projects kind of lumped together will end up as a cost savings overall for the village.
Does Fox Metro participate in any of that lining for clay? Because it helps them also, right, for infiltration and reduces flows to their plant. Do they don't help at all? They just mandate that you do it?
They don't have any mandates. Again, something I alluded to, they don't mandate anything upon the village or any of the other villages or cities they represent. They do monitor flows. I know they're working actively to decombine sewers in other communities, and obviously look out for their best interest. But at this time, they're not mandating. But again, that's not to say that they don't in the future, or that their hand isn't pressed either by IEPA to hand down those mandates.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions comments on?
C. Pete, you had mentioned additional, C, yes.
Oh, I didn't know. It's past 9 o'clock.
Yeah, it is, it's late. You had mentioned the possibility of having to increase our storage capacities at the receiving stations. What type of capacity, what would that look like, and is there any anticipation of those fees and the rates that we're looking at?
We have monies budgeted in the CIP for the receiving stations. They're not final, but we've made a preliminary analysis of the size, so I think there's ample money in the program for that. It'll be refined a bit. We're also determining whether we're going to do ground storage or elevated or maybe standpipes, depending. There's cost elements to those, and what we're suggesting is, when we do the continuous service modeling for the village, that we also then evaluate the type of tanks that are out there and available, and give you some options as to what we think is going to be the best value. But there's money in this program now to cover that cost. And I think that's the other element that Michelle mentioned is, 3 to 5 years, you're going to reevaluate things. We're going to have final costs in on the pipeline that DuPage builds. We're going to have a lot of our final costs in, so all that can change a little bit. So you're going to continually be, tweaking this a little bit to kind of get you on the right path. So I'm confident we have enough money in the CIP program right now, but I do think it's worth our while to refine it before we build it.
So theoretically, really, in 3 years, we could be looking at this again and have to increase these projections by 10%.
Yep.
Possibly.
Well, you don't know, right? But I think it's prudent to look at them. There's just a lot of things that are happening. I mean, no one could foreseen the spike that we had in inflation that just recently happened. These things happen, so, this is the best estimate that can be made at this time. And again, I think you just can't set it and forget it. You've got to come back and look at things, that's all. Maybe it goes up, maybe it doesn't. I can't predict the future, and we hope that we'll be, some of these numbers will come down, but you never know.
The good thing is that at conceptual level, 2 years ago to today, I don't know what level you would count this as, the numbers are getting more dialed in, and they're still in line with what we were looking at conceptually. So in another couple of years, it feels like a lot of work to do in 2 years, but a lot can change. We'll have to revisit it again.
The receiving stations, are they going to require a clear well or just going to pump in pipe? Or?
They won't require a clear well. They'll come into, we'll have two options. We'll be able to directly pump from the feed or pump out of the ground storage or standpipe that's alongside of it. So you'll have some flexibility there.
I was gonna say, I thought maybe you guys were gonna talk about water meters again?
Gonna talk about what?
Water meters again?
No, we're way
We all-
beyond water meters.
We all heard that. All right, any other thoughts, questions? I mean, the prudent option appears to be 3C at this point, based on presentation.
3C, but I'm sure we'll debate this again when Doug's here.
It's true. Well, we'll give him the PowerPoint, and, we're not gonna give the whole presentation again, but I think,
He's going to get the 2-minute version.
Or you could just watch the video.
yeah, I think based on the direction of the board, you can move forward with the 3C option. And you can review your packets and see if you have additional questions. And then you had another slide with the timeline.
Yes. It's actually 2 slides. Just prepping, nothing short. So we did the water rate presentation tonight. I think staff is going to begin updating the code, submitting for legal review the week of February 3rd. You could probably start that early. I'm just teasing. February 24th at the board meeting would be the first reading approval. And budget presentation will occur. Jennifer and Jeff gave me the schedule here, so
Yeah.
feel free to add in. That March 10th would be the second reading of the water rate ordinance for approval. And the budget presentation will be capital and infrastructure improvement funds. Then March 24th, 2025, at the board meeting, there would be the budget public hearing, the budget presentation for water and other funds, then the budget ordinance first reading, and the grocery sales tax ordinance first reading. And then April 14th is when, at that board meeting where the budget ordinance would have the second reading and the second reading for the grocery sales tax as well. So with that, I will tell you, thank you very much for sitting through it, but open it up for any other questions. If you wanted to add anything on the schedule, let me know.
This is awesome. Very thorough. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Very well done. I would expect no less.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, so going back to Chris's PowerPoint, just so you're not hanging? Or should we do that at a different time?
Well, I mean, I think based on.
I think
what
it's
you
pretty
select-
obvious.
Based on what you selected for the water, that directs us. I
You got direction?
He has his answer.
Perfect.
think we're good.
All right. See, so efficient at 9 o'clock. All right. What's next? Anything, thanks, by the way. Anything new or unfinished?
Yep.
Oh.
Two quick items. Director Wolf, could you please check with our waste service to make sure they are covering the trucks when they're going through the neighborhoods? I received a complaint about that, and they indicated they saw a truck without the cover. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay.
Other item, I received a complaint, and we all know how I feel about the single-serve liquor in town. Got rid of that because of my dislike of it. I was told that one of our retail liquor license holders was selling little bottles, and I will share the name of that at, after the meeting. But I was interested in having a checkup on our retail liquor license holders to make sure that that's not happening in multiple places, please. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else?
I have one. At the last meeting, we had talked about increasing fines for like specifically snow ordinance, right? I meant to bring up, and I had spoken with Administrator Zoffel prior to the meeting, but I forgot to bring up the fact that I'd like to take the threshold for those citations from 2 inches to 1 inch, and I'll explain my logic behind that. When the guys are out salting, 1 inch or less is usually handled with just salt. It's when you get above 1 inch that you have to put the blades down, and that's when the problem starts. So I'd like to see us lower that threshold for citations from 2 inches to 1 inch. And I've asked him to put it on the agenda for a meeting here in a few weeks.
Cool. I'll talk about it then. Anything else? All right, you can see future meetings. Plan Commission meeting, February 6th. We will have that meeting. And at this time, would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss the appointment or dismissal of legal counsel for the village pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C1.
So moved.
With no action after. Moved and seconded. Go ahead, call the roll.
Trustee Guyer?
Youngerman.
Youngerman. Trustee
Yes.
Youngerman? Trustee Marisak? Trustee Wadowska?
Yes.
Trustee Guyer?
Yes.
Trustee Spurling?
Yes.
Trustee Bauman?
And we're adjourned. Thank you.